I think we're going to hear from Mike Potter at Appyway. Mike is coming up to the stage. Thanks again to Appyway for sponsoring today's event. Mike, the floor is yours.
Cool. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us. Thank you to Elk Creek for arranging the event. Thank you to Anthony and Darren for setting the session up. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to create a little bit of a trigger for some discussions over coffee, which you'll be relieved to hear isn't too far away now in terms of how this is coming through. Let's come through to here. So I'm Mike Potter, Head of Customer Success at Appyway. I'm going to run through about unlocking curbside potential. So it's part of that technology, the TTF process, mainly focused on digital traffic orders, but why it's important, why digitisation is no longer optional. So to begin with, really, in terms of it as a general approach, digital curbside management, what does it mean? It touches all kinds of forms of transport or mobility, and how that runs through. But to start with, I'd like to paraphrase a DFT and TTF report back in August 2022. So this isn't a new thing. I'm not going to pretend that it is a new thing. The report was the Curbside Management Discovery Report. Now, curbside space has become an essential part of the nation's transport infrastructure. Curbside activities are perceived as crucial by users. Curbside's now potentially a major contributor to the UK economy through its function in enabling access for people, services, goods and public transport. I think it is important that we focus on the people. I think, Darren, you mentioned that earlier in terms of we think about transport, but is people within that process. Allowing pedestrian movement, I know that's something that's been discussed as well. Storing vehicles, be it for shared or for private usage, as well as the development of new public realm and schemes and how we want that to look. And the report cited two pretty compelling areas on why the digital curbside is an important area to focus on, and why the need to act in that space is now, or in August 2022. But firstly, there's a series of digital projects, and we're going to hear about more on that later on. Paul, I think you're going to be discussing that through later on as well. A few digital projects, as I say, data products, policy reviews, currently in development or implementation. This includes, but not limited to, APTS, digital traffic orders, or DTRO, which I know Paul Chandler is very excited that we are now calling it DTRO rather than digital traffic orders. But also on from that piece as well, secondly, the curbside space as a managed asset could play a greater role in delivering national objectives, be that from decarbonisation through reallocation of curbside space away from more traditional uses to more contemporary uses, air quality, modal shift, and there are national, regional and local curbside access strategies that could be set up to support sustainable active means of travel. Now, transport planning has been mentioned already today in terms of that wider space. I know, Steve, you mentioned this earlier on. For me, a digital managed curbside, it does underpin an awful lot of what we are working towards within transport. It is kind of a core foundation within that sense. I think, Anthony, you used that phrase earlier on in terms of it sets a foundation in terms of what to build on from a traffic management point of view, digital traffic order management point of view. Either you manage it through digital traffic orders or as a separately managed asset. For me, it should be a key part of transport planning. Although I say transport planning, I'm not sure that conjures up the image that we need to for the challenges of today. It's been mentioned around pedestrians and vehicle movements and things like that in that space, because for me, transport conjures up an image of trains, planes and automobiles rather than more active forms of transport. So I'm thinking about things in terms of mobility planning and how the curbside can be used to encourage that use. I think it encourages a more inclusive perspective of how the road space is used by people rather than thinking about modes of more traditional forms of transport. And the reason for that, for me, is that the curbside is where the majority of mobility, of transport, of trips begins and ends. It's the start point, it's the end point for the majority of our journeys, both directly and indirectly. Effective management of the curb and the data that's associated with it, and this isn't just linked to parking data, this can come through to moving order data as well. But effective management of the curb can have a significant impact on the future of mobility. And what that looks like can be shaped by how your curbside is set up, how it's managed, Typically or traditionally, this has been at the expense of more active or accessible forms of travel, mainly to the benefit of motor vehicles. A phrase that comes to mind is kind of car is queen or king. But in this space, we've got many authorities and suppliers leading the way in terms of how they're able to make the most of their curbside data, be it through digital traffic order management or digital curbside data and managing that as an asset type to shape future planning on the network and how it can benefit communities. Now, an example of that for me that stands out, last mile mobility management. I think I've seen Toby somewhere, so it'd be worth having a chat with Toby on what Grid are up to in that space as well. But often the destination is seen as the ultimate aim of the vehicle or the individual in that vehicle. What if a digitised curbside could influence people's decisions when it comes to travel, be it through parking, loading choices, the form of transport that they want to take? What if, before heading out on your trip, on your journey, there'd be an alternative to driving was highlighted as being quicker or more sustainable to give a more informed choice at that point of travel. Now, there is a mandate, of course, for digital traffic orders, but it's not just being done for the sake of it. There is very genuine reason for doing it. There are sound benefits to having that machine-readable data. Definitive traffic order data is not just for enabling or supporting connected or autonomous vehicles, for example. So work that we've been doing with Motability Operations, which I think was touched on at last year's event as well, is focused on how having that digital curbside data available can have wider societal benefits for opening up towns and cities for people that otherwise might not feel able to go and take part in activities and be part of the community. So that was a really valuable piece of insight that we've gathered from mobility in that space. And also I've mentioned Grid already in terms of what they're delivering, which is focused on delivering, for want of a better way of putting it. But do go and have a chat with Toby on what comes up on that throughout the day. Now, I could go on and on about that, but I'm not going to. You'd be pleased to hear, because I'm sure you're going to be wanting to have a bit of a break from the sessions today. But also, just to be clear, there are other supermarkets available. That was just a stock image that came through. Now, I've mentioned data already and asset data. Now, we're quite familiar with that within the highway space in terms of asset management. We're thinking about the road surface, we're thinking about drainage assets and other drainage assets across the network. But for me, a map-based curbside management data setup, or digital traffic orders, DTRO, make management information more accessible. They allow for quicker responses to things like FOI requests. Sorry, Chris, I think I've seen you earlier on. We were having a chat about that the other day. Or be it internal requests to get more collaboration between teams, be it from mobility transport planning teams, asset management teams, parking teams, traffic order management teams and traffic management teams more generally. But it can include examples of knowing how many disabled bays you have across a given area, how many permit bays you have. Do you know how many disabled bays you have across your network? Do you know how much of your network is covered by CPZ? How sustainable is your curbside? Is it geared towards motor vehicles? Is it more geared towards active travel usage and setup? And how are you monitoring your progress against that? Now, data is one thing, but the knowledge that sits behind it is arguably more important. I've mentioned drainage assets already, so again, I'm not saying that this is a new thing, but it's one thing knowing where all your drainage assets and systems are. It's another thing knowing about how they're performing, how full are they overflowing, are they causing flooding, etc. Now, an example where this can come into its own within a curbside management space, you can enhance the data that you have. Now, it might be well and good knowing how many paid bays you have, how many permit bays that you have across your network, but you can enhance that information with occupancy data, with length of stay data, and actually working out how your curbside is being used. Can you allocate it to other use cases, and how that will come together? It will also aid you in more robust financial management as well. Potentially, you will be able to know how much of your network is covered by WL lines. Do you always know how much that's going to cost to replace? Do you know how much that asset will cost to replace if you were to do it in full? You might know that more for how much it's going to cost you to unblock your gullies every year, how much it's going to cost you to fill your potholes, but do you know how much it's going to cost to keep the rules of the road, if you like, maintained and set up? In short, just to summarise, for me anyway, they're fairly compelling reasons in terms of why you would want to digitise your curbside, completely separate from whether it's going to be mandated or not. In terms of what it's going to enable you to do is have that data-driven mobility strategy, and you can shape what that strategy looks like. I'm not saying that there's a right way or a wrong way of putting that together, but it can also enable smarter journey choices, be it through the work that we're doing with mobility operations or work that Grid are doing in terms of bookable loading bays and things like that, in terms of encouraging or discouraging the circling of freight around the network. More sustainable asset management, understanding how the network is set up to be used, and also potentially underpinning all of this in terms of that foundation piece and building on that is a more efficient TRO management approach. So whilst that is a compelling reason from a day-to-day operational or efficiency management point of view, there is also a mandated reason that's on the horizon in the not too distant future in terms of why you're going to have a digital curbside via digital traffic order management in time. So whilst it's rapidly becoming something that can't be avoided for operational and efficiency benefits, there is legislation coming into play that's going to, if you like, mandate that reason. But it is for very sound reasons. Sometimes it can be, we're having to do it, but there are sound reasons that underpin that, and hopefully there's something within that this morning that you can build on. Now, I'm not going to want to steal too much of Paul's thunder any further on the DTRO setup, so do come and have a chat with us during the break if you want to find out more. Feel free to scan the QR code that's behind me. There's a bit of a guide on DTRO management and curbside management more generally, but otherwise, thank you for your time. Enjoy your coffees. Hopefully chat to some of you later on.
So, again, let me just check if anyone had any immediate questions. Mike's going to be here for a bit, I think, so people can approach if you've got something you want to chat about. But if there were any specifics I had, again, I'm afraid I have one myself, which is if I were, say for the sake of argument, I was not of the traffic and highways community, but I was the chief financial officer of the local authority.
Yep.
What's the pitch to me? Because it's all very well to be telling me I could buy something and do things better and faster. I tend to be, I don't know how you guys feel about this, more obsessed with doing things more cheaply.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and it's a question that does get put to us quite a lot in terms of what that looks like, because there are costs associated with certain setups and systems, but there's an awful lot of time that can be saved in terms of turning things around. We're seeing authorities being more proactive. So rather than having to be reactive and not dealing with, or there's a backlog of work or schemes that come through, we're seeing with a more efficient approach, authorities are working through that backlog of traffic order management sides of things, and by being able to work through that backlog more efficiently, they can then be more proactive with the schemes that they're delivering to enable mobility schemes going forward. So there are costs associated with it, of course there are, but in terms of actually delivering more for communities, and it's often up the top of elected members' lists in terms of changing how the rules of the road are going to be assigned, be it reduced speed limits or parking controls or opening space up.
Well, thinking specifically, briefly also about parking controls and what you said about knowing about a frequency with which the curbside is used, it did strike me there's an echo there of this pressure isn't going to go away, folks. Pressure for having charge points for electric cars. I mean, this feels like the sort of data I would crave if I were in a local authority, or indeed the Department for Transport, to get a sense of, are we putting chargers in the right places?
Yeah, and a part of that, well, it's a piece of work that we've not touched on a huge amount, but in terms of taking requests from the public, by people being able to see what information is already available, they might be thinking, well, I want to have an EV charge point here. They might, by seeing the information that's available, realise that there is one round the corner that they'd be able to use. But it can also inform decisions. So if you're getting multiple requests for EV charge points within a particular location, you can better understand whether that is going to be more feasible. If you're reading it alongside street lighting data and connectivity, whether an EV charge point is actually going to be able to be plugged in, for want of a better way of putting it, before the vehicle can even be plugged in, and that can help as well.
Key point. Okay. If there are no questions, hang on a sec. We have a question from the floor. So, hang on a sec.
Can you hear me? Yes. Rob Clayton, Sheffield City Council. Obviously, we use your product, not me directly. So temporary TROs,
Yep.
are they picked up through this, or if not, how might they be in future?
So temporary traffic orders, or TTROs, they're included within the DTRO project and set up. It is a space that we're very much aware of. It's something that we want to explore further, but that's probably the most I can say on the topic at the minute. But we can catch up in a bit.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, in that case, with no further questions, I'm going to say thanks again to Mike. Right, the feedback we get is a key part of these events is the networking, it's the chance to catch up with people. So you are now going to get a roughly 30-minute chance to catch up with people. Please be back here by 25 past. See you then.